quick example of probably one of the most infamous examples of political polling information that was not conducted correctly or gathered correctly was actually back in 1936. So Literary Digest underestimated the vote for President Franklin Roosevelt by 19%, erroneously predicting a really big victory for the Republican Al Landon. The well-established magazine ultimately became a laughingstock and then soon went out of business because of its fallibility. And although the number of responses the magazine obtained for its poll was a staggering 2.3 million number of respondents, the methods used were badly flawed. Trying to reach as many people as possible, the magazine drew names from the biggest list they could find, including telephone books and motor vehicle records. And in the midst of the Great Depression, the people on those lists were the average income level. Only 40% of the public had telephones then, and then fewer still owned cars. And they were more likely to vote Republican. And the moral of the story is accurate representation, not the number of responses, is the most important feature of a public opinion survey. And so again, it's not how many you poll, but rather who you poll. Okay, so the most common form of trying to reach a mass audience for conducting public opinion polls is from the random digital dialing. And this is when calls are placed to phone numbers within randomly chosen exchanges or area codes. And people are paid, this is their full-time job, is to cold call random numbers and then ask people if they wouldn't mind completing a survey. And if you still have a landline at your house, you probably have answered the phone at one point in your life and been asked if you'd like to participate in a survey. And so hopefully now you understand sort of what the purpose is. It's going to be interesting over time to see how the decreasing number of landlines changes the methods of reaching a lot of people. One of the great things about calling people is that if you hire a big enough staff, you can call millions of people from different areas. But again, as that number decreases, you need to make sure that your representative sample is truly, in fact, representative. And so the whole concept of polling to measure public opinion does not come without both support and criticism. People who support polling say that it helps politicians stay in touch with the changing opinions on issues. So again, it kind of keeps them connected to what the general public, the American people, actually want. However, critics of polling believe that it makes politicians more concerned with following rather than leading. So for example, politicians should have steadfast, strong beliefs that they stick to and are loyal to, but if they are instead making their judgments based off of what they're seeing in opinion polls, which make them think they're more likely to win, it's going to be different information. And so how do polls influence American democracy? Without fail, the most widely criticized type of poll is the election day exit poll, and this is when people are sent to voting places, and the voting places are randomly selected around the country, and then these workers ask every 10th person how he or she voted, and then those results are shared, which can thus, I guess, alter the predictions and outcomes of races. And these are just opinion polls, and these are not the actual votes. So a lot of times these opinion polls will make statements of things that they are claiming to be true, when in fact not a single vote has been counted. In some presidential elections, such as in 1984 and 1996, the networks declared a national winner, while millions on the West Coast still had hours to count votes. Critics have charged that this practice discourages many people from voting and thereby affects the outcome of some states and local races. So for example, if someone in San Francisco is watching an East Coast news program that's already declaring the winner, people out here might think, well, my vote's not even going to matter, so why would I vote? It's unlikely that someone in California would feel that way about California not being significant, but hopefully that makes sense. And then also the wording can also affect the results that are shared, again, as stated to be true. So for example, in February 2010, the New York Times and CBS News poll found that 70% favored permitting, quote, gay men and lesbians, end quote, to serve in the military, whereas only 44% favored military service by, quote, homosexuals who, quote, openly announce their sexual orientation. So it's kind of interesting that the question is essentially asking the same thing but using different words, and it was a huge point difference. So we're talking 70% favor compared to the 44%. Also, this shows why in evaluating public opinion data, it's crucial to carefully evaluate how questions are posed. Fortunately, most major polling organizations now post their questionnaires online, thereby making it much easier than ever before for everyone to scrutinize their work. And it's also kind of interesting when we look at what polls reveal about Americans' political information. And from this, we have coined the term paradox of politics. And this is the idea that the American political system works as well as it does, given the discomforting lack of public knowledge about politics. So, for example, in 2006, a Zogby national poll showed that 74% of respondents were able to name each of the three Stooges, Larry, Curly, and Moe, but just 42% of those people could name each of the three branches of government: judicial, executive, and legislative. And so it's interesting that in a world where we have a very, very uninformed public when it comes to political issues, that politics still fosters so much personal opinion and functions as it does, despite the fact that the Americans really don't have much knowledge of what's going on in our country or definitely in the world. And there's a bunch of different graphics and charts that we can look at this to show kind of how stupid Americans are. I'm sorry, not stupid, uninformed. So what is important to Americans, even though it's arguable that they are informed? And what is important to them helps create labels or ideologies, and political ideology is a coherent set of beliefs and values about public policy. And most commonly, Americans choose the ideological label of conservative or liberal. And conservative labels, as we can see here from a 2011 poll, is definitely the majority. So 41% of people polled labeled themselves conservative, 36% moderate, and then 21% liberal. And it's interesting if you break down by age, young people are much more likely to choose a liberal political ideology compared to their older counterparts who are more likely to choose conservative. And there is also another way to break down this information when we look at gender. And the gender gap, which is a term that might show up on a test, is a regular pattern in which women are more likely to support Democratic candidates than the Republican candidates. And here are a couple examples. So in 1996, Bill Clinton was the Democratic candidate who ran against the Republican Bob Dole, and 54% of all women voted for Clinton. This was significant because the margin of victory was like 8 million popular votes was the deciding factor in a couple of the biggest states in terms of electoral votes. And a lot of people believe that because the majority of women voted for Clinton instead of Dole. And then in the 2008 election, we saw a similar thing where 56% of women voted for Barack Obama.
Do you remember when we used to sing? Sha-la-la.